12 plants behave exactly like grapevines. You plant them once, they climb and spread, then produce food year after year without replanting. These climbing perennials turn vertical spaces into productive food sources lasting decades. A 4 by 8 foot ground bed gives you 32 square feet of growing space, but add a 6-foot trellis and you just added 48 square feet of vertical growing space, more than doubling production without using additional ground. I'm Frank Miller with Heritage Garden Wisdom, and the climbing perennials I'm revealing today transform fences, arbors, and trellises into three-dimensional food production systems that never need replanting. Most gardens waste vertical potential completely. Fences doing nothing, walls doing nothing, arbors doing nothing. Subscribe to Heritage Garden Wisdom right now if you're ready to turn every vertical surface on your property into permanent food production. We release vertical food gardening strategies that maximize space efficiency. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me which climbing perennials you're already growing or which ones you want to establish first. By the end of this breakdown, you'll know exactly which 12 climbing perennials will revolutionize how you see every fence and structure on your property, turning wasted vertical space into decades of harvest. Understanding the grapevine comparison clarifies why these climbing perennials are valuable. When you plant grapevines, you're making a long-term investment in vertical food production. Year 1, the vine establishes roots. Year 2, it starts climbing. Year 3 produces a few clusters, but by year 5, that vine covers 20 feet of trellis and produces dozens of pounds of grapes, continuing production for 20, 30, even 40 years. One planting creates decades of harvest from vertical space that would otherwise be wasted. The 12 plants I'm revealing follow that exact pattern. They climb, spread, cover structures, and once established, produce food year after year without replanting. This is critical for homesteaders and preppers because vertical growing space is often completely unused. The math is compelling. A ground-level garden bed measuring 4 feet by 8 feet provides 32 square feet of growing space. Add a 6-foot trellis to that bed and you just added 48 square feet of vertical growing space, more than doubling production area without using additional ground. That's the power of vertical food production. When you use perennial vines instead of annual climbers, you get that production for decades without replanting. Plant number 1, perennial runner beans. Most people think all beans are annual. They're not. Scarlet runner beans are perennial in zone 7 and warmer. They die back to tuberous roots in winter and return from those roots every spring. The vines grow 10 to 12 feet tall, covering trellises with bright red flowers and edible beans. You plant runner bean tubers or seeds once. They establish the first year. Starting year 2, they return from roots and produce beans all summer. Year 3, the tubers are larger and production increases. By year 5, you have massive tuberous roots producing vigorous vines and heavy bean harvests, continuing for 8 to 10 years from one planting. Each vine produces several pounds of beans annually, and 3 vines on an 8-foot trellis, and you're harvesting 6 to 9 pounds of beans per year for a decade. That's 60 to 90 pounds of protein from one planting. Plus, the flowers are beautiful, edible, and attract pollinators. Plant number 2, Caucasian spinach. This perennial climbing vine produces spinach-like leaves on vigorous vines growing 8 to 10 feet tall. Grow it on a trellis, fence, or arbor. It produces leaves from spring through fall, dies back in winter, but returns from roots every spring. Caucasian spinach is heat-tolerant, meaning it keeps producing even when regular spinach bolts and becomes bitter. Harvest leaves continuously throughout the growing season, and the vine keeps producing more. It's like vertical spinach that never needs replanting. One plant covers 6 to 8 feet of trellis and produces several pounds of greens per season. Plant 3 vines along a fence and you're harvesting 10 to 15 pounds of greens annually for years. That's permanent vertical greens from one planting. Plant number 3, Turkish rocket or perennial arugula. While not a true climbing vine, Turkish rocket grows tall and benefits from vertical support, reaching 3 to 4 feet while producing continuously. More importantly, it's perennial, returning from roots year after year. Turkish rocket has a sprawling, somewhat climbing habit that works well against fences or with light support. The leaves have that peppery arugula flavor, perfect for salads. Unlike annual arugula that bolts in 6 weeks, Turkish rocket produces for months and returns every year. Planted along the base of a fence or trellis, it'll grow upward and produce leaves spring through fall. Cut it back and it regrows. It dies back in winter and returns in spring. That's permanent arugula from one planting. Plant number 4, perennial pea vines. Everlasting pea or perennial sweet pea produces edible shoots and leaves, though not as palatable as regular peas. However, some varieties produce edible pea pods. These vines are primarily grown for their nitrogen-fixing properties and as living mulch that climbs. Perennial pea vines grow 6 to 8 feet, die back in winter, and return from roots in spring. They're extremely hardy, tolerating poor soil and neglect. Once established, they spread and naturalize, creating permanent ground cover that also climbs any available support. While not the most productive food crop, perennial peas are valuable for their ability to fix nitrogen in soil, improving fertility for other plants. They're the support crop in a perennial food system. Plant number 5, hardy kiwi vines. Hardy kiwi, also called kiwi berry, is a perennial vine producing for 30 to 50 years. These aren't the fuzzy tropical kiwis. Hardy kiwis are smooth-skinned, grape-sized fruits that taste like regular kiwi. The vines are incredibly vigorous, growing 20 to 30 feet and requiring strong support. Hardy kiwi is cold hardy to zone 4. The vines are deciduous, losing leaves in winter but returning every spring. They take 3 to 5 years to start producing, but then produce heavily for decades. Each vine can yield 50 to 100 pounds of fruit annually at maturity. You need male and female vines for pollination unless you buy self-fertile varieties. Plant them on strong arbors or pergolas. By year 5, they're covering massive areas with edible fruit. By year 10, they're producing over 100 pounds annually, continuing for 30 to 50 years. Imagine planting hardy kiwi vines at age 30 and harvesting from them until age 80. Your children inherit producing vines. Your grandchildren might still harvest from them. That's multi-generational fruit production from climbing vines planted once. Plant number 6, hops. Hops vines are perennial bines, technically not vines, but they climb similarly. They die back completely to the ground in winter and return from rhizomes in spring. Hops grow 15 to 25 feet in a single season. The growth is incredibly fast and vigorous. Hops cones are used for brewing beer, but they're also edible. Young hop shoots in spring are considered a delicacy in Europe, tasting similar to asparagus. The leaves can be used for tea, and of course the cones are valuable for home brewing or for sale. Hops rhizomes are planted once and produce for 15 to 20 years. Each plant produces 1 to 2 pounds of dried cones annually. If you brew beer or know people who do, hops are valuable. Even if you don't brew, hop shoots in spring are a gourmet vegetable that most people have never tried. Plant number 7, passionflower vines. In zones 6 and warmer, some passionflower varieties are perennial, producing stunning flowers and edible passion fruits. The vines are vigorous, growing 20 to 30 feet and covering large structures. Passionflower vines die back in colder zones but return from roots if mulched heavily. In warm zones, they're evergreen and produce year-round. The fruits are highly nutritious, packed with vitamins, and unique in flavor. Maypop passionflower is the cold hardy variety that grows in zones 6 through 9, producing purple flowers and egg-sized fruits. Once established, it spreads through runners and creates permanent edible landscapes. You plant it once and it naturalizes, covering fences and producing fruit for years. Plant number 8, Chyote vines. In zones 8 and warmer, chayote is a perennial vine producing massive amounts of food. Chayote is a squash-like vegetable grown throughout Latin America. The entire plant is edible: fruits, shoots, leaves, and tuberous roots. Chayote vines grow 30 to 50 feet in a single season. They're incredibly productive, with one plant yielding 50 to 100 fruits per year. The fruits store for months. The shoots and leaves are eaten like greens. The tuberous roots are eaten like potatoes. In warm climates, chayote is the ultimate perennial food vine. You plant one fruit, which sprouts and grows. By the end of year 1, you're harvesting. Year 2, production explodes, and the vine keeps producing for 10 to 15 years from one planting. That's potentially 1,000 to 1,500 fruits from one initial planting. Plant number 9, Malabar spinach. In tropical and subtropical climates, zones 9 and warmer, Malabar spinach is perennial. It's a vigorous climbing vine that produces spinach-like leaves on vines growing 10 to 15 feet. The leaves are heat-tolerant and produce all summer when regular spinach is impossible to grow. Malabar spinach dies back in frost but returns from tuberous roots in warm climates. It also self-seeds prolifically, so even in colder zones, it acts like a perennial through reseeding. The vines cover trellises and produce continuously when harvested regularly. Each vine produces several pounds of greens per season. The leaves are slightly mucilaginous like okra, but delicious in stir-fries and soups. The purple berry variety produces stunning purple berries that are edible and used as natural dye. Plant number 10, climbing nasturtiums. While often grown as annuals, nasturtium varieties in warm climates act as short-lived perennials. They self-seed so prolifically that they function as permanent crops through continuous reseeding. The vines climb 6 to 8 feet and cover structures. The entire nasturtium plant is edible: leaves, flowers, and seed pods. The leaves are peppery like arugula. The flowers are beautiful in salads. The seed pods can be pickled like capers. Nasturtiums also have pest-repellent properties, protecting other plants. Plant nasturtiums once and let them self-seed. They'll naturalize and return every year through seeds. You'll have permanent edible flowers and greens climbing throughout your garden. That's edible landscaping that perpetuates itself. Plant number 11, groundnut or Apius americana. This is a perennial climbing vine that produces edible tuberous roots underground. The vines grow 8 to 10 feet, covering trellises with attractive flowers. But the real value is underground: high-protein tubers that Native Americans cultivated for centuries. Groundnut tubers contain 3 times more protein than potatoes. They're rich in nutrients and store well. The plant is perennial, returning from tubers every year and spreading through underground runners. Once established, groundnut creates permanent patches of edible tubers that multiply annually. You plant a few tubers along a fence, they climb and spread. Each year the patch grows larger. You harvest some tubers and leave some to regenerate. Within 5 years, you have a naturalized patch producing 10 to 20 pounds of high-protein tubers annually, and it keeps spreading and producing indefinitely. Plant number 12, air potato, or Dioscorea bulbifera. In zones 8 and warmer, air potato is a vigorous perennial vine producing edible aerial tubers that hang from the vines. The vines grow 20 to 40 feet, covering enormous structures. The aerial tubers are edible when properly prepared, and the underground tubers are also edible. Air potato is considered invasive in some areas because it's so vigorous, but that vigor is exactly what you want in a survival crop. Once planted, it spreads and produces massive amounts of food with zero care. The aerial tubers can be harvested without digging, making them easy to collect. One vine produces dozens of aerial tubers annually. Those tubers can be eaten or replanted. Within a few years, you have multiple vines producing hundreds of tubers. That's permanent calories climbing vertically from one planting. These 12 plants represent 3-dimensional food production, maximizing every cubic foot of your property, not just every square foot. Most gardens are flat, using only horizontal space, but your property has massive vertical potential. Fences, walls, arbors, pergolas, trellises, all of that is wasted space if you're only growing ground-level annuals. When you plant perennial vines, you turn all that vertical space into productive food systems. Imagine your property 5 years from now after planting these 12 climbing perennials on every fence, arbor, and structure. Hardy kiwi vines producing 100 pounds of fruit on your pergola. Runner beans covering your garden fence with protein. Chayote vines producing hundreds of fruits on your shed wall. Groundnuts spreading underground while vines cover your trellis. Every vertical surface produces food, and you haven't replanted anything in 5 years. That's the vision. That's three-dimensional homesteading. That's using space efficiently. The beauty is that these vines require minimal ground space. A 1-foot by 1-foot planting area at the base of a fence can support a vine that covers 50 square feet of vertical space. You're getting 50 times more growing area from the same ground footprint. The financial value is significant. If you convert 10 fences and structures to perennial food production using these vines, and each produces even just 20 pounds of food annually, that's 200 pounds of food per year. Over 20 years, that's 4,000 pounds of food from vines planted once. At $3 per pound average value, that's $12,000 of food from maybe $300 of initial investment. But it's not about the money. It's about resilience. It's about using every available space. It's about creating food systems that don't require annual inputs. It's about permanence in a world of temporary solutions. Here's my challenge. Identify every fence, arbor, pergola, wall, and trellis on your property. Make a list. That's your vertical growing inventory. Now commit to planting at least 3 of these perennial vines in strategic locations. Cover your fence with runner beans. Plant hardy kiwi on your pergola. Establish chayote on your shed wall. Watch what happens over the next 5 years. Watch those vines establish and spread. Watch them cover structures with food-producing growth. Watch your vertical spaces transform from wasted to productive, and realize you never have to replant them. If this breakdown from Heritage Garden Wisdom changed how you see the vertical potential of your property, subscribe right now because we're creating detailed growing guides for each of these climbing perennials. Share this with someone who has unused fences and structures. Drop a comment telling me which perennial vine you're planting this year. I want to know who's going three-dimensional with food production. I'm Frank Miller, and this is Heritage Garden Wisdom, where food security isn't just about square footage, it's about cubic footage. Plant vertically, harvest for decades.